If the great god Xenu resurrected Cormac McCarthy from the dead right now, and he knocked on your door and said, "Hello, I am here to edit your novel," what changes would he make? Well, we actually know a ton about Cormac McCarthy's editing philosophy, because in the last couple decades of his life, he started to edit his scientific friends' books. But I have personally been to the Cormac McCarthy archive and seen thousands of edits McCarthy has made in his own works on his drafts, and have looked at the arguments he's had with his editor over punctuation, characters, and how he writes his stories. And so in this video, I'm going to give you everything that I know so that you can hopefully tighten up your writing. And if you guys don't already know, Write Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Cormac McCarthy here on YouTube. In the playlist down below, right down there, I already have over 175 videos on McCarthy, and that list is growing weekly. So let us get into this. So McCarthy shows up and he reads your manuscript, and I automatically know that he's going to find one of two problems which 99% of writers suffer from and never really transcend. And so even though McCarthy loved to write these epic passages about nature and give characters epic oratory abilities like Judge Holden, when you look at the core of a lot of his work, it's short sentences and very simple writing. And McCarthy, while editing one of his friend's books, asks him in a certain section, quote, "How about agree to something simple, unloaded?" And if any of you guys have played a wind instrument or a brass instrument, you know that playing softly is much harder than playing loudly. And the same could be said about minimalism. And in every single book, there are going to be opportunities for maximalism and minimalism, for seriousness and for humor. And when you go into writing something like a 100,000 word novel, it's like you are playing in a video game and you have certain attributes. And so if you are going to write simply, you're going to have to keep us entertained, because a lot of beginner writers suffer when they try to write this simple story and keep it kind of like Hunter S. Thompson or Ernest Hemingway or Charles Bukowski, kind of that feeling. But what they lack is great imagery, feeling, tone, rhythm, syntax, the ability to add unconscious elements or just to draw interest in general, to be interesting people. And when you simplify your writing, and what McCarthy really believes in is removing obstacles for the reader, because when we look at one of McCarthy's more famous positions as a writer, it's his punctuation. He very rarely, he almost never uses semicolons outside of The Orchard Keeper. He doesn't use quotation marks. He isn't a fan of commas. And sometimes he can go on for an entire page without using a period, because he believes that if you are moving a story forward, if you are using images and movement, then you don't need commas or a period. If you are a master of dialogue, then we should know who's talking. We don't need dialogue tags and quotation marks. There are over 15 other things you can do than put a semicolon. And McCarthy says you don't want to slow the reader down. That's what makes postmodernist fiction or bad fiction hard to do, because if you are bogged down with having to think, then you're not really enjoying the story. And at the start of McCarthy's career, because this also has to do with what McCarthy are you getting? Are you getting the McCarthy who wrote The Road and is in the later stages of his life? Because he would be asking you to cut everything. There's a quote that I'm going to talk about on the channel that says, that he made in 2008, I think, where he tells writers that no one wants to read your 800-word novel anymore. There is no opportunity to write a Moby Dick or a Dostoevsky novel or something like that that's super long, because we don't care. And I would say that's true, that it's an unfortunate thing, but William T. Vollmann trying to release a 1,000,000-word novel, or that random guy that's always trying to get you to read his 500,000-word novel. It's insane. I have a lot of data on this, and I see how a lot of you guys write, because people send me unsolicited manuscripts every single day, even though I tell them not to. And I just delete them now, unfortunately, because when you get as many as I get, I don't have enough time in the day to read them all. But a year and a half ago, when I had a lot less subscribers, I would check some of them out and be like, okay, what are people doing? And And there is a good portion of them that are way too long. If you are a beginner writer or trying to get your first thing going, you have to have some form of confidence to think that you can lay out even 100,000 word novel and it's going to be coherent. And this, I think, stems to back to the fact that a lot of us are the most talented people in our little inner circle. I was talking to a guy the other day in my Right Conscious office hours who lives up in North Dakota, and he's not a writer or anything, but he lives in this small town and he's a big reader. And I could just tell him, like, holy shit, like, people around him, like, must think that this guy is some form of like intellectual savant. And he's really smart, humble, super great guy. But some people kind of take that confidence that in their group, they took AP classes, they got a degree in English, and they're like, okay, I have something to say. But making someone sit down for 8 hours, 5 to 8 hours, depending how long your book is, and read something is such a big commitment. And when you watch something on Netflix or HBO, it's been vetted by a lot of people. There have been writers and producers, and even HBO and Netflix release a lot of shit. And so writing and reading a book is a really scary thing, especially one that's unsolicited or unreviewed or just kind of gaining its legs, because you are like, do I want to waste my time on this? Because I hate not finishing a book. Another thing that a lot of authors suffer from that McCarthy talks about is that you don't want to worry too much about readers, in the sense that a lot of authors try and resolve a lot of the problems before they come up. And this is kind of stems from overthinking and the logical mind, because like I used to have a roommate who was super into sales. Like he was just popping Adderall all day and like walking around trying to sell solar. And he would sit and write down all the different objections that these people would have and try to write. And he would ask me for editing help, and he tried to pinpoint in his like script like all the objections in the 10-second opener. So then the people were like, wait, he just got rid of all. I don't care if you're renting, I don't care if you're moving or don't have solar. All that stuff was all knotted up. But in fiction, actually, the more mystery the better. And this leads me to another tangential point that McCarthy, I think, really exemplifies, is that a lot of beginner to intermediate writers, and even people like Ayn Rand and others, kind of go on these philosophical dialogues. And it stems back to this being the smartest person idea. So you have these ideas of the world and you think you are unique and special, and you want to share these ideas with others because, the people around you, they don't understand that. The people in my small town in Arizona have never read Heidegger before. But the issue that you run into is that the people in my small town aren't going to be the ones reading my novel. It's going to be someone like me or you reading the novel, and we're, mostly familiar with basic aspects of philosophy. And I'm not as impressed by that. I have, and as you have heard, basically every single theory out in the world, and how it's uniquely exemplified and talked about is obviously cool and always different. But there's nothing new under the sun with ideas. And so a lot of over-elaboration happens when writers make characters have these dialogues and tell us about their philosophy and their life. And like, I think of like a cult leader when it comes to this, because I have a novel that really isn't on, it's on the back burner. It's not what I'm currently working on, but I wrote a first and second draft years ago, but it's about a cult. And something that clicked in my head was that, okay, we have this weird group of people, and in the first draft, I had this cult leader, and he was giving speeches and all this stuff that were super epic. And a lot of it was at the start of the novel. And I was like, yeah, people are really going to get to know how crazy this guy is. But if just in a couple pages, if I just describe how these people are living, what they're doing, and what they believe, they'll know, the reader, will automatically know that the cult leader is insane. He doesn't need to be doing anything weird or giving long speeches. And McCarthy exemplifies this perfectly in Blood Meridian. We go all throughout the novel. We go, at least halfway through the novel, and no spoilers really here. And Judge Holden really isn't giving these epic speeches. At the start of the novel with Reverend Green, he just says a sentence or two. And just his aura, his vibe is what matters. And then that makes it more epic at the end when he starts giving these speeches, because we finally get a small glimpse. But when you look at those speeches, they're actually very simple. McCarthy's not circle jerking on Nietzschean philosophy or these types of things. And even better, something McCarthy does to make his stories and ideas more simple and kind of avoid this idea of over elaboration, because none of us want to be talked to by someone completely and dogmatically. And that's what happens with these characters who go on these monologues. They're talking to you dogmatically. And what McCarthy does is shield them with stories or parables. In Blood Meridian, Holden, while kind of talking about his actualization or his philosophy of creating simulacra and symbolizing the world, he shows us that what he is a judge of through the parable of the harness maker. Sheriff Bell in No Country for Old Men, we hop into his unconscious and learn a lot about the story through his dreams. And McCarthy, in his italicized sections, and sometimes by, making us confront a random troop of people like in The Crossing, or, these random characters who tells us a story, he kind of defers these speeches to these characters. And it's a really genius idea. And most of the time it's really simple. In The Crossing, they go to this kind of abandoned church and meet this ex-priest or whoever. And we get this beautiful commentary on God and religion, which I think Cormac McCarthy believes. But we're hearing it through this priest in kind of this broken land. And that's something I think a lot of writers can do to simplify their work. And this is something that McCarthy struggled with a bunch, and something that he actually consciously starts to reduce in his work. So my favorite example of this is The Orchard Keeper. And in there are a bunch of kind of loose ends and meetings between characters who don't really know that they are related from other events. And at probably the first 3 or 4 drafts of that novel, he resolves it all at the end. He kind of elaborates on it. But then really in the later stages of editing, while working with his editor, they work out and he basically removes any resolution. And that whole kind of segment and idea led to one of his most famous and most impactful lines I've ever read, which is, there are no more heroes. And it's like, that's a big idea, that in this modern industrial age that like everyone is corrupted, everyone is screwed up, and we can no longer look to these kind of idols and icons. And so he gives us the philosophy. He gives us all this in one line and saved all the explaining for later. So that's what he would tell you. He would say, you're not that important. And this is something that he had to learn, because in The Orchard Keeper, he came into it with the big ego. He told the editors at Random House when they sent him a contract and they said, okay, let's get editing. He told them, hey, what do you mean editing? This novel's already perfect. McCarthy is also not a fan of absolutes. When you look at a lot of his works, you see these absolutes, right? You see these characters and they're extreme, like in Blood Meridian or Anton Chigurh or Lester Ballard or whoever. But when you look at the heart and soul of his work and the characters he cares about, John Wesley Ratner, Cornelius Suttree, Billy Parham, John Grady Cole, the father and son in The Road, Bobby Western, they aren't complicated men. They have a tolerance. They don't function in these kind of absolute terms and are generally kind of citizens of humanity. And, that's something that he really believes in, I think uses as a narrative device in that simplicity, because he ignores all internalization, which we should be talking about also, that McCarthy doesn't believe in this Proustian idea that we need to get inside a character's head, because that's not what's important. You don't need to do that to share your philosophy. That's even a more radical idea that he preaches and would probably tell you to fix in your editing. That if you focus on the theme and the language and kind of the plot of the novel and kind of these symbolic stories, that's going to say everything. We don't need to get inside the head. And once again, that comes back to the idea of a human-centric focus. McCarthy throws all that down because we love to focus on the human. That's why there's people like Rupi Kaur and others, because we elevate human ideas in our lives to the utmost level and ignore everything else. But if you get out of absolute land, if you get out of your own head, you become a citizen, I keep saying that word, of earth, like McCarthy was. And when you understand that, the inner dialogue, the inner chatter, it starts to shut off. And something McCarthy also doesn't do is take these absolute stands. He, most of the time, is proclaiming very reasonable things and kind of showing a vision for something within his novels. Even when you have rape and pillage and all these different things, you have the epilogue of Blood Meridian. You have the epilogue of the Border Trilogy. You have Sheriff Bell's Dream, the end of No Country for Old Men. You have the glimmer of hope at the end of The Road. You have the beautiful passages at the end of Stella Maris and the Passenger, and of Suttree, and of The Orchard Keeper. There are only a couple books where McCarthy doesn't give us a way out of some of these absolutes and some of this, negativity. I think he would also look at you and tell you, I mean, just straight up, how long have you been working on this? I mean, and for some people, he'd read it and be like, you have no talent. McCarthy was a talented person and really believed in this idea. His idols, Melville, Faulkner, Dostoevsky, all these guys were talented motherfuckers. They weren't sitting here writing. They weren't writing shit at the start of their lives and getting better. They were writing fire and really good stuff basically the entire time. And, you know, I hate to be that guy. And it's not good for me economically, you know, to tell you guys that talent does play a role in this. But when we're talking about the highest level, then that means something. And you don't have to function on the highest level. You can write a novel and it maybe isn't the most serious thing of all time, but you have to pitch it differently. You know, once again, these are kind of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that when people send me their novel, they're telling me that this is important, that this means something. Like, I've been working on this forever. They're not saying this is a fun exploration of these different ideas. Like, they're phrasing it like they want to compete against the greats. And that's something that I think we need to change in our head because, for instance, Cormac McCarthy loved Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I have a free PDF on Cormac McCarthy's favorite books and authors. The link is down in the description below, alongside the link to my Cormac McCarthy course and my Cormac McCarthy book club and my Right Conscious Writers group and my book club and so many other things. And if you guys want to hang out with me in daily office hours, have over 25 hours of Cormac McCarthy content, and that's growing every single week, be a part of the Right Conscious Book Club and Right Conscious Book Group, then I would highly encourage you guys to check out the link down in the description below. And if you guys are broke and don't have any money, I was once a starving artist, and so I also provide free poetry every single day that I write and a free essay every single week, also at that same link. And McCarthy's final bit of advice is that you have to realize where your audience is and understand you can only move the needle so far. And this may seem inauthentic, but McCarthy's saying it. But we all want to change the world. Like, here I am on this channel all the time talking about the literary renaissance and all the stuff we're going to do. And it's like this very extreme idea and how your work can transform the world. But that's going to happen one book at a time. You know, it'd be great if we had the Ubermensch book that just changed everything overnight. But we're going to, you know, walk back to the great writing, to people caring about reading and deeper thought in this country, person by person. And eventually it will start to snowball, but artists build upon each other. There is a certain energy. I was reading today that one of my favorite authors, three of my favorite authors, you could say, Wendell Berry, Larry McMurtry, and Ken Kesey were all at the Stanford Writers Workshop together for years. And when you look at the modernists like Eliot and Pound and Williams and all the other Miller and Hemingway and all the expatriatist modernists in Europe, there are certain pockets of writers that come together and things just explode. But they start building upon each other. They have to find each other first. And I think that's where what we need to focus on first is kind of gaining momentum as a group with a certain ideal. I can't tell you what that is yet. I know it's something to do with writing consciously, uplifting people and bringing them to higher planes of consciousness, because as a global collective, we have an opportunity to do that, for the first time ever. Illiterate people can't necessarily be a complete human being spiritually. I mean, you know, the Taoists would argue different because you're missing the intellectual, physical, and emotional component of reality. You know, spiritually, if they're in tune, they can connect with nature and function at a high level. But the other three really require a knowledge of the self and, you know, a physical books to be able to excel in, or data. But I'm sure you guys kind of get annoyed sometimes when I'm talking about meditation and all this stuff. And that's because the gap is too far. And so we have to take it step by step. And I think that's what McCarthy really did with a lot of his novels. And he actually was a beautiful foreshadower. He foreshadows the darkness of necrophiliacs with Lester Ballard and Child of God, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, all the other weird people hadn't started to do that stuff yet. He predicted the fall of male consciousness with the Border Trilogy and us kind of, you know, in his epilogue, and us kind of moving toward this weird society where we no longer have any freedom. In The Passenger and Stella Maris, he predicted the malignant aspects of the United States government. He had drafts done in 1980. I've read them in the Cormac McCarthy archive. It basically was the same novel. And even though he didn't release it, he knew where everything was going. But it wasn't extreme. You don't read his works and are like, wow, this is some extreme vision. you kind of like, yeah, man, maybe I should spend some more time out in nature. Wow, maybe our government really did screw up with the nuclear bomb. Wow, maybe this world we're creating are going to create more outlier individuals like Lester Ballard. And so, unfortunately, Xenu is probably not going to resurrect Cormac McCarthy. But what we can do together is step into the moment in 2024 of writers. It's not 1960 anymore. You cannot sit and submit your manuscript to some slush pile and expect anyone's going to read it. You can't post it online or on Kindle and think anyone's going to buy it. It's not going to fucking happen. We're going to have to change our mentality if we want to make an impact, if we want to take people on this slow journey to actualization. And so I hope on this channel, I'm going to help you guys with that. And I want to tell you that I believe in you and I know that we can do this, but I can't do this alone. I've been saying the word 50,000 lately. We need 50,000 writers who are writing consciously before we have any form of a sizable impact on the publishing and book world. We probably have already a couple, tens of thousands of you guys who just need to have a couple mentality shifts on how you share your work, and then 20,000 more who are just, need to improve some skills and work on a couple other things. And in the next 5 to 10 years, that can become a reality. So I would love to see you there. I'd love to see you guys down in the comments. I read them all, and I will see you guys in the next video.